She sold her wedding ring. The Mafia king bought it and found her pregnant the pawn shop on Rue de Sendra. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Aria Voss stood outside the pawn shop with the ring pressed between her fingers so tightly that the small diamond bit into her skin. She wasn't sure whether she was trying to feel something or trying not to. Either way, it hurt. And somehow that felt right.
She had not eaten since yesterday.
Not because she forgot. Because she had counted every euro in the coffee tin on her kitchen counter and come up 43 short of next month's rent. And inside her, small as a secret, terrifying as a confession, was a life that had not yet decided whether it wanted to exist. 6 weeks. 6 weeks since Marco walked out. 6 weeks since the word divorce sat between them at the dinner table like broken glass neither of them dared touch. 6 weeks since she discovered that the man she had married had not only emptied their savings account, he had done it beside a woman named Elise, who wore the same perfume Aria had worn on their wedding day. She pressed her free hand flat against her stomach. 6 weeks. The ring had cost Marco nothing. It was a family heirloom he'd given with one hand and taken back with the other when he left. She was only returning what had never truly been hers to keep. She pushed open the pawnshop door. The bell above it rang like a small, tired apology. Chapter 2. The Man Who Buys Beautiful Broken Things. Nero Adesi did not visit pawnshops.
He owned them.
All 7 in the city. He had acquired them one by one over 4 years. Not because he needed the income, but because a man who controls what desperate people surrender in their worst moments controls something far more valuable than money. He controls the geography of grief. He was there that afternoon because his accountant had flagged an irregularity in the Rue de Sendra books, and Nero handled his irregularities personally. Always. He was standing behind the back curtain reviewing the ledger when the bell above the door chimed. He didn't look up immediately. He heard the clerk greet the customer. He heard a woman's voice, quiet, precise, stripped of any excess emotion the way a voice gets when a person has spent all their tears in private and refuses to spend any in public. "I'd like to sell this, please. It's a platinum band. The diamond is 0.8 carats. The setting is original 1940s, pre-war. I was told it was worth close to 4,000. Nero looked up. She was standing at the glass counter with her back very straight, the way people stand when they are fighting the urge to fold entirely. Her coat was good quality but old. The kind of good quality that comes from buying one thing well and keeping it a decade. Her hair was damp from the rain, and she hadn't bothered to fix it. She was looking at the ring and the clerk's hand with an expression Nero recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone saying goodbye to the last version of themselves they had ever loved. The clerk offered her 800 euros. She didn't flinch. She said, very quietly, "All right." And that quiet, devastating surrender was the thing that made Nero step out from behind the curtain. Give her 4,000. She turned. Her eyes were gray-green and very tired, and they looked at him the way eyes look when they have stopped expecting anything good from strangers. "I don't need charity," she said. "It isn't charity. The ring is worth 4,000. My clerk was cheating you." She looked at him for a long, careful moment. Then she looked at the ring still lying in the clerk's palm, a small, collapsed promise. "Then give me 4,000 and keep the ring," she said. "I don't want to see it again." Chapter 3. The ring on his desk. Nero private. He put the ring on his desk that night and did not lock it in the safe with the rest of the inventory.
He was not a sentimental man.
He had not been one since he was 9 years old and watched his father's empire collapse like wet paper and his mother sell her own rings on a street corner in Palermo while pretending to look for something she dropped. He had rebuilt everything from the rubble of that humiliation, and he had done it by becoming precisely the kind of man who does not feel things he cannot use. And yet, the ring sat on his desk, and he found himself thinking about the way she had said "all right," those 2 small words carrying the weight of everything she had swallowed. He thought about how she had not cried, how she had clearly decided, before she ever walked through that door, that she would not cry, and how that decision had cost her something visible, something he could see in the line of her jaw, in the absolute stillness of her hands. He had not asked her name. He picked up the ring and turned it in the lamplight. On the inside of the band, small, worn, but still legible, he read the engraving. Aria, semper.
M.
Aria. Always. He set the ring back on the desk. He poured himself a drink he did not taste.
Semper.
The man who had written that word had left her alone in the rain to sell the proof of it for rent money. Nero sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Chapter 4. The second time. He found her again 11 days later. Not because he had searched, he told himself this, and nearly believed it. He had simply followed a thread of information the way he always did. The ring was registered to a Marco Voss. Marco Voss had a wife named Aria. Aria Voss had been a music teacher at the Conservatoire on Avenue St. Clair until 6 weeks ago, when she had quietly resigned. The Conservatoire's director owed Nero a favor. It was not difficult. Nothing was ever difficult for him to find. She was in a small cafe near the river with a cup of tea growing cold at her elbow and a notebook open on the table. Sheet music, he thought, covered in penciled corrections. She was concentrating hard enough that she did not see him until he was already seated across from her. She looked up. She went very still. "You're following me? I'm having coffee. In the same cafe I happen to be in. It's a public establishment." She closed the notebook and looked at him the way she had looked at him the first time, carefully, without warmth, without hostility, simply measuring. He was beginning to understand, a person who measured everything before she moved. "What do you want?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's unusual for me." Something moved in her expression. Not quite amusement. Not quite sorrow. Something in between, like a note that isn't written on the page, but the musician plays anyway. "That's a dangerous thing to admit," she said. "I'm a dangerous man," he said. "I can afford it." Chapter 5. What he saw through the glass. He saw her by accident. He was certain it was an accident because nothing about it was arranged, and Nero Adesi arranged everything. He was leaving his attorney's offices on Rue Marchand when he crossed the small square where the Clinique Sainte Marguerite sits between a pharmacy and a florist, and through the glass front, he saw her in the waiting room. She was sitting with a paper cup held in both hands. She was wearing the same coat. Her hair was pinned up loosely. She was staring at the floor with an expression he had not seen on her face before, not the careful composure of the pawnshop, not the guarded measurement of the cafe. This was something rawer. This was fear that had no more room to hide. He stood on the pavement and looked at the name printed in small institutional lettering beneath the clinic's crest. Clinique Sainte Marguerite. Gynecology and Maternite. He stood very still for a moment that stretched like a held breath. She had walked into that pawnshop carrying a ring engraved with Semper. She had sold it for rent money. She had been wearing a coat too thin for autumn cold. She had been careful, so desperately careful, not to cry. And now she was sitting in a maternity clinic alone, holding a paper cup in both hands like it was the only warm thing left in her world. Alone. The word landed in Nero Adesi's chest like something physical, like something that had been looking for exactly that place to fall. Chapter 6. The Mafia King does not beg. He was waiting outside when she came out. She stopped on the clinic steps and looked at him, and the expression on her face broke something in him very quietly, the way old wood breaks, not suddenly, but along a line that had been forming for a long time. "You should not be here," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then why are you?" He was a man who had given orders in 4 languages. He had negotiated in rooms where the wrong word meant someone did not walk out. He had never, not once in 41 years of living, stood in front of a woman on clinic steps and felt the complete inadequacy of every sentence available to him. "Because you sold a ring with Semper written inside it," he said finally. "And the man who put it there is not here with you today. And I find that I cannot walk past that." Her lip trembled. Just once. She pressed them together immediately. "You don't know me," she whispered.
No.
"But I know what it looks like when someone is carrying something they should not be carrying alone. I know it because my mother carried exactly that weight, and I was 9 years old and too small to help her." He held her gaze. "I am not 9 years old anymore." She had thought she was invisible in her suffering. She had been so careful to be invisible. And now this man, this frightening, impossible man, was looking at her as though she was the only thing in the square worth seeing. The rain began again.
Softly.
The way it does when it has no argument to make. Aria Voss stood on those clinic steps and, for the first time in 7 weeks, she did not press her tears back. She let 2 fall. Only 2. She was still, even then, someone who measured what she allowed. He did not reach for her. He did not offer words he couldn't keep. He simply opened his umbrella, black, wide, expensive, and held it over her head. 1 arm's length between them. A shelter, not a claim. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "You don't have to," he said. "Not tonight." Chapter 7. The ring returned. 3 days later, he left something at her door. No note. No knock. Just a small velvet box on the threshold of her apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled of old wood and someone's cooking. She opened it in the hallway with her coat still on. Inside was her ring, the platinum band, the 0.8-carat diamond, the 1940s setting. And threaded through it was a small slip of cream paper on which he had written, in handwriting surprisingly precise for a man of his kind, "This does not belong to him anymore. It belongs to whoever comes next." She sat down on the hallway floor. She had not planned to. Her legs simply stopped working. She sat there with the ring in her palm and read the note twice, and then pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since Marco had walked out the door, because someone she had known for 11 days had seen her more clearly than the man she had married for 3 years. Chapter 8. What comes next? 3 months later. She did not accept his protection easily, or his money, or his presence. She argued with him about all 3, methodically, for weeks, and he let her argue because he understood that a woman who had been dismissed and abandoned and left to dissolve quietly needed to know that her voice moved something in the room, that it landed, that it mattered. He learned her the way he learned everything that interested him, completely and without announcing that he was doing it. He learned that she played Satie when she was sad and Chopin when she was angry, and that she made coffee too strong and drank it too fast, and that she talked to the baby when she thought no one was listening, small, murmured things, gentle and private, that she directed downward with her hand flat against her stomach. He stood outside her kitchen doorway one evening and heard her say, very softly, "I don't know who we're going to be yet, little one. But I promise you we are going to be all right." And Nero Romance, who had not made a promise in 20 years because he refused to make ones he couldn't guarantee, felt something rearrange itself in him. Something fundamental and irreversible. He walked into the kitchen. She looked up, startled. Her hand stayed on her stomach. "I heard that," he said. "I know." She didn't look away. "I was saying it for myself as much as for them." He crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin to look up at him. Close enough that he could have counted her freckles, if the light had been better. "You are going to be all right," he said. Not a comfort. A fact. The way he stated all facts, without room for argument, without softness to hide behind, just the bare weight of his certainty. "I am going to make sure of it." Her gray-green eyes searched his face for the lie, and didn't find one. "Nero. I know what I am," he said quietly. "I know the life I have lived, and the things I have done to keep living it. I am not asking you to forgive any of it. I am not asking you to love me." A pause. "I am only telling you that you will not be alone again. Not while I am standing." She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached up, slowly, giving him every opportunity to step back, and placed her palm against his jaw. He went very still under her hand, the way dangerous things go still when they are unexpectedly touched with gentleness. "You bought my ring," she said softly. "Yes. You could have kept it in a drawer. You could have forgotten me the moment I walked out the door." "Yes. Why didn't you?" He turned his face slightly, so that his mouth was almost against her palm. He felt her breath catch. "Because Semper was written on the inside," he said. "And someone had to mean it." Epilogue. Semper. The baby came in March, on a morning when the city smelled of rain and early blossom, and Nero Romance sat in a hospital chair that was too small for him and held a child that weighed less than any of the terrible things he had ever carried, and felt the whole architecture of himself rearrange around that small, extraordinary weight. She was watching him from the bed, still tired, still beautiful in the way that people are beautiful when they have just done something enormous and survived it. "She has your hands," Aria said. He looked down. The baby's fingers had wrapped around his thumb with a grip that was, frankly, absurd for something so new to the world. "She has your stubbornness," he replied. Aria laughed, low and exhausted and real, and the sound of it filled the room like the first warm note of a song he hadn't known he'd been waiting to hear. He looked down at the child, at these 10 fingers that had decided, apparently, to hold on. He thought of a ring with Semper written on the inside, sold on a rainy afternoon by a woman who had run out of options and had not, even then, run out of dignity. He thought of the pawnshop bell, the cup of tea growing cold, the clinic steps, the velvet box outside a third-floor door. He thought of all the ways a person arrives without meaning to, exactly where they are supposed to be. Semper. He pressed his mouth to the baby's forehead and then looked up at Aria, this woman who had walked into a shop with nothing left and somehow walked out with everything, and said the only word he had ever meant without reservation in his entire careful, armored, ruthless life. Always. The world he lives in. The world found out about her in April. Not because Nero announced it. He was not a man who announced things. He was a man who simply made them true, quietly, and let the world catch up. But the world he inhabited had eyes everywhere, and a woman living in his penthouse on the Rue Imperiale with a newborn daughter and a third-floor apartment abandoned behind her was not something that stayed quiet for long. The first photograph appeared in a tabloid on a Tuesday morning. Aria, leaving the pharmacy 2 streets from the building, the baby strapped to her chest in a pale gray wrap, her hair loose, her face unguarded in the way it only was when she didn't know she was being watched. Beside her, half a step behind, always half a step behind, she had noticed, never in front, was one of Nero's men. The headline read, "Who is the woman carrying the Mafia king's heir?" She was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee when she saw it. She read it twice. Then she set it flat on the table and sat very still for a moment. Nero came in from the corridor, jacket on, already halfway through his morning. He looked at the paper. He looked at her face. "It was going to happen," he said. "I know. It changes nothing." She looked up at him. "It changes everything, Nero. You know it does." She wasn't angry. She was precise, which was, he had learned, considerably more dangerous. There are people in your world who will look at her and see a liability, a leverage point, a way to get to you. Yes. And that doesn't terrify you? He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, unhurried, deliberate, and looked at her with those dark eyes that had never once, in all the months she had known him, looked away from something difficult. "It terrifies me every hour of every day," he said quietly. "She is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. You both are." Aria blinked. "Then why?" "Because the things that terrify me are the things worth protecting." He reached across the table and turned the newspaper face down with one hand. "And I am very good at protecting things." She looked at his hand on the paper. She thought about all the things that hand had likely done, all the things she had chosen, carefully and deliberately, not to ask him about. She had made that choice with open eyes. She wanted to keep making it. "They'll come after her," she said softly. "Eventually. Someone will." "Yes," he said. "And when they do, they will discover what every person who has ever come after something of mine has discovered." "Which is?" He stood, picked up his coffee, and looked at her over the rim of it. That it was the last thing they ever tried. Chapter 10. Valentina comes to visit. His sister arrived unannounced on a Wednesday, which was, Aria would later learn, the only way Valentina Adesi ever arrived anywhere. She was 2 years younger than Nero and looked nothing like him. Where he was all controlled darkness, Valentina was warm and sharp and laughed loudly at things other people only smiled at. She blew into the penthouse like weather, dropped a leather bag that cost more than Aria's old monthly rent onto the hallway table, and walked straight past Nero without greeting him to stand in front of Aria with her hands on her hips and an expression of frank, unguarded assessment. "So," she said, "you're real." "Yes," Aria said. He told me about you in February. One sentence. You know what the sentence was? I have no idea. Valentina glanced sideways at her brother, who was leaning against the doorframe with the particular stillness of a man pretending he is not braced for something. He said, "There is a woman. She is not afraid of me, and she doesn't need anything from me, and I don't know what to do about her." Aria turned to look at Nero. He looked back at her with absolutely no expression whatsoever, which meant she had learned that he was embarrassed. "That was a private conversation," he said to his sister. "I'm your sister. I don't have private conversations, I have intelligence briefings." Valentina turned back to Aria and smiled. Wide, genuine, nothing like the careful, measured smiles of the people who surrounded Nero. "I like you already. Where is my niece?" Chapter 11. What he watches. He watched her with the baby the way he watched very few things in his life, without strategy, without agenda, without any part of his mind already 3 steps ahead. He simply watched. She had a particular way of settling the baby against her shoulder, a small, practiced rotation, like a key finding a lock, and then she would begin to hum. Always the same fragment of melody, incomplete, the last few bars trailing into silence, as though the song had somewhere else to be. He had never asked her what it was. He was afraid that asking would make her self-conscious, and then she would stop, and he did not want her to stop. He was standing in the doorway of the nursery one night at 2 a.m. when she turned and saw him. She didn't startle. She had stopped startling at his appearances weeks ago. "She won't sleep," Aria said softly. "I heard." He crossed the room and stood beside her, looking down at the baby Elise. She had named her Elise, and when she told him, he had watched her face carefully to see whether it was a wound or a reclamation. Was, he decided, a reclamation. Aria Voss did not wound herself on purpose. "May I?" She passed the baby to him with the ease of someone who had watched him hold her 100 times and knew by now that his hands, those hands, were remarkably, improbably gentle. He settled Elise against his chest. She made a small, indignant sound and then went quiet, as babies sometimes do with large warm presences, surrendering to the sheer mass of reassurance. Aria sat down in the chair by the window and watched him pace, slow, measured circuits of the small room. "Nero," she said quietly. "What happens when the trouble comes?"
He didn't stop pacing.
"Which trouble?" "The kind you're already thinking about. The kind you've been thinking about since February." A pause. "Then it comes," he said. "And I handle it. And us." He stopped pacing and looked at her across the dim room. This woman who had sat in a pawnshop and refused to cry, who had carried a child alone through winter, who had let him in by degrees so small and careful it had taken him months to realize how completely she had let him in. "You are not something that happens beside my life," he said. "You are not something I protect from a distance and visit on weekends." He looked down at Elise, asleep now against his chest. "You are the reason the rest of it means anything. Without you, I am simply a powerful man in a large empty apartment. With you," he stopped. Started again. "With you, I am something I do not have a word for yet. Something I am still learning the shape of." Aria was quiet for a long time. "You know what I find most frightening about you?" she said finally. "Tell me." "You say things like that, and you mean every single word." "Yes." "Most men don't." "I know," he said. "Most men are not me." It was arrogant. It was completely, infuriatingly true. She laughed softly, and the laugh moved through the quiet room like something being set down after a long time of being carried. Chapter 12. The Man from Before. Marco Voss came back in May. He did not come to the penthouse. He was not that stupid, or perhaps not quite that reckless. He came to the conservatoire, where Aria had recently returned to teach 2 afternoons a week, and he waited for her in the entrance hall with the particular posture of a man who has rehearsed what he wants to say and is now terrified none of it will work. She saw him before he saw her. She had 3 full seconds to decide. She could have walked back out. She could have called the car that Nero kept waiting 2 streets over. She could have done any number of things that would have been arguably sensible. She walked toward him instead. "Aria." He said her name the way people say the names of places they grew up in, Familiar, slightly uncertain, aware that the place has changed. You look… Marco.
He stopped.
Her voice was not cold. It was something quieter than cold. It was simply finished. Like a room where all the furniture has been moved out and the windows left open.
Clean. Done.
I heard about the baby, he said. She's mine, isn't she? You were all ready. Yes. Something moved across his face. Grief, she thought, or the closest thing to it that Marco was capable of, which had always been mostly grief for himself.
I didn't know, he said.
I know you didn't. If I had… Marco. She said his name with something close to compassion, because she had carried this particular weight long enough to have made peace with it. It wouldn't have changed anything. Not really. You know that as well as I do. He looked at her. He looked at her the way people look when they realize, too late, what they held and set down and cannot now pick back up. Who is he asked. The man they're writing about. Adesi.
She paused. Considered.
He is someone who showed up, she said simply. That's all. He just kept showing up. Marco left 20 minutes later. She didn't watch him go. She stood in the entrance hall for a moment, her hand flat against her collarbone, taking one slow breath. Then she took out her phone and called Nero.
He picked up on the second ring.
He always picked up on the second ring.
Marco is here, she said.
A pause. I know. Are you all right? Yes. She considered it honestly. Actually, yes. I really am. Another pause, shorter, different in quality. I'll send the car. I know you will, she said. That's why I called. Chapter 13. The question he doesn't ask. June arrived warm and unhurried, and Nero did not ask her to marry him. Valentina pointed this out to him over dinner one evening when Aria was not present, with the bluntness that was her only real inheritance from their father. You love her, Valentina said. Observant. You love that child. Yes. So why? Because she sold a ring with Semper on the inside, he said, and the man she trusted it with used it as nothing. I will not put another ring on her finger until she wants it there. Until she is not doing it because she is grateful or because it is practical or because she is afraid of being alone again. He looked at his sister. She will ask me. When she is ready, she will be the one to ask. And I will wait. Valentina looked at her brother for a long moment. Papa would not recognize you, she said. No, Nero agreed. He wouldn't. He picked up his wine. I find I don't mind. Chapter 14. Semper. She asked him on a Thursday evening in July when the city was warm and the windows were open and Elise was asleep and the apartment smelled of the dinner she'd made and the particular easy quiet that had, somewhere between winter and summer, become the sound of their life. She didn't go down on one knee. She sat beside him on the sofa and turned to face him with her legs folded underneath her and the directness that had always been the thing about her that undid him completely. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. And I need you to know that it is not because I'm afraid. It is not because I'm grateful. It is not because of Elise or because of the apartment or because of any of the things you have done. I know, he said quietly. It is because you are the only person who has ever looked at me at my absolute worst, at my most broken and frightened and stripped of everything, and looked at me like I was something worth staying for. Her voice was steady. Her hands were still. It is because of that, and only that. He waited. Will you marry me, Nero? He looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had walked into a shop with a ring to sell and walked, without either of them understanding it, straight into the center of everything he was. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had been carrying it since March. He set the velvet box on the cushion between them and opened it. Inside was the platinum band, the 1940 setting, the 0.8 carat diamond, the ring she had sold on a rainy afternoon when she had nothing left. But the inside of the band had been re-engraved. The old inscription was gone. In its place, in the same precise handwriting as the note he had left on her doorstep. Aria. Semper. N. She looked at it for a long time. When she looked up, her gray-green eyes were bright, and she let them be. You had it the whole time, she said. Since the day you sold it. You were waiting. I told you, he said. I am very patient. She laughed, That low, real laugh that still moved through every room it entered like the first warm note of a song. And he slid the ring onto her finger and she let him, and it fit exactly as it always had, because some things, once they find their shape, do not change. Outside, the city moved through its summer evening. Inside, Elise slept in the nursery, dreaming whatever it is that new people dream. And Nero Adesi, who had spent 41 years building walls and calling them power, sat in the warm quiet of a life he had not known he was missing, and felt, for the first time, that he was exactly where every road he had ever walked had been trying to take him.
Semper.
Always. Finn.
She didn't need to be saved. She needed someone to stay.
And he stayed, stubbornly, silently, completely, until staying became the truest thing he had ever done. This is an Aria and Nero romance story. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional romance stories.